Hey everyone, welcome back to another explainer. I am seriously so pumped you're here today because we're tackling what is honestly one of the most notoriously tricky challenges in the tech world right now. And that's shipping healthcare software rapidly while somehow still navigating these incredibly strict regulatory frameworks. If you're building in this space, you know the pressure, right? Digital health is absolutely booming, and you've got stakeholders breathing down your neck demanding faster releases so you can grab that market share. But at the exact same time, you've got HIPAA, the FDA, and these wildly complex interoperability standards just staring you down. And they carry the threat of massive fines or completely blocked launches if you get them wrong. So today, we're going to look at how to perfectly balance those scales using structured, agile engineering.
Okay, so for the longest time, development teams have been stuck in this brutal trap. It's a massive false dichotomy. On one side, we have build fast, where teams just sprint ahead, well, actually sprint blindly ahead to meet aggressive deadlines. But because they totally ignore compliance during the build phase, they just rack up this enormous mountain of technical debt that eventually comes due. Then on the other side, we have stay compliant, where development basically slows to an absolute crawl. Every single feature gets dragged through endless committee reviews, effectively blocking your go-to-market strategy and just letting your competitors win. We're always told we have to choose between speed and compliance. But the core premise of our explainer today is that this is a complete myth. You absolutely can ship compliant healthcare software fast.
All right, here's our game plan for today to dismantle this whole bolt-on compliance trap. We'll start with the healthcare software trap itself, then step 1, mapping your risk. Next, we'll hit embedding and automating requirements, followed by the end-to-end life cycle, and finally, the true cost trade-offs. Let's dive in. Starting right off with Section 1, the healthcare software trap. To really grasp this trap, we got to look at how painful and honestly, how wildly expensive it is to try and slap compliance onto a product after it's already built. There's a quote from our source material that just hits the nail on the head here. Compliance is treated as a QA gate instead of an engineering input. I mean, that right there is the root structural problem. Most teams hit the exact same brick wall. They build super fast, they pause for a compliance review, and then they basically throw the product over the wall to a compliance officer who predictably says no. Then begins this frantic scramble to retrofit security controls into an architecture that literally wasn't built for them. When you treat compliance as a final hurdle instead of a foundational input, it totally kills your timelines. Auditors flag undocumented decisions, you're stuck doing expensive rework, and your engineering team just burns out doing endless compliance cycles on features that, let's be real, should have been done right the first time. But what happens if we just flip that script? The data paints a remarkably clear picture here. Look at this number, 40 to 60%. When teams start treating things like HIPAA, HL7, and FDA rules as a parallel engineering track, not just some annoying afterthought, they consistently chop their audit cycles by 40 to 60%. And why? Because engineers aren't doubling back to totally rewrite databases or slap on audit logs months after the fact. The work is already done. And the best part is, they achieve this massive efficiency gain without actually sacrificing release speed. It's entirely about changing when and how you think about the rules of the game.
Moving on to Section 2. Step 1. Map your risk. So how do we actually fix this? It's all about adopting a shift-left mindset. That means dragging our compliance thinking all the way to the very beginning of the timeline, before Sprint 1 even kicks off. To do this, you've got to ask yourself 3 massive questions before typing a single line of code. Number 1, does this software touch Protected Health Information, or PHI? 2, are we hooking into electronic health record systems using HL7 FHIR, or V2? And 3, is this software actually considered a medical device? Answering these up front is totally non-negotiable. The answers fundamentally change your architecture. If you touch PHI, suddenly you need a regulatory risk map, highly detailed data flow diagrams, and a preliminary threat model right out of the gate.
And speaking of medical devices, notice this definition for FDA SaMD. Software as a medical device. This isn't just some handy internal company tag you throw around, it is a hardcore, strict legal classification. If your software falls under this category, like say it uses an algorithm to diagnose a condition or suggest a treatment, it immediately triggers some extremely heavy stuff. We're talking rigorous design controls, ISO 14971 risk management for patient safety, and comprehensive quality management systems. You absolutely cannot, I repeat, cannot, retrofit these documentation requirements cheaply after the product is already built. If you try, you are looking at months of agonizing remediation and totally stalled revenue.
All right, Section 3, embed and automate requirements.
This brings us to actually making compliance a native part of your engineer's daily workflow. Step 2 is making these requirements first-class tickets. And step 3 is automating the compliance evidence. The absolute worst mistake you can make here is sticking compliance in some isolated, separate backlog.
If it's living on an island, it's out of sight, out of mind for your developers. Every single user story that touches patient data, authentication, or third-party integrations needs to carry explicit acceptance criteria tied directly to those regulatory requirements we were just talking about.
Let's ground this with a concrete example so you can see how it works in the real world. Imagine a standard sprint ticket for a patient record search feature. Instead of just coding the search bar and moving on, the ticket itself has the explicit acceptance criteria baked right in. First, audit log generation for every single query. Who searched, when, and what exactly did they look for? Second, role-based access control validation to make sure the user is actually allowed to see that specific data. And third, a data minimization check. This is huge under HIPAA, by the way. Is the response returning only what is strictly needed, or are we accidentally overfetching their whole patient history? By tying this explicitly to the user story, your engineers are kept in the loop as they build. They know exactly what done actually means, rather than getting ambushed by a compliance audit at the end of the quarter. Plus, it naturally leaves this beautiful, robust documentation trail.
And that flows perfectly into step 3, automation. Look, auditors want hard evidence. If you're relying on humans to manually pull that together, it's going to be incredibly slow and just riddled with errors. So, you automate it. You automate those time-stamped access logs for every PHI event. You run dependency scanning straight in your CI/CD pipeline, which is absolutely critical, by the way, because unpatched, outdated dependencies are a massive vulnerability and a top finding in HIPAA audits. You also automate encryption validation to make sure data is locked down in transit and at rest. And finally, you automate scheduled backup and recovery drills. Automating these checks isn't some optional, nice-to-have overhead. It is the exact verifiable evidence package that turns a miserable, weeks-long audit into a quick few days.
Which leads us to Section 4, the end-to-end lifecycle. To really bulletproof your process against compliance gaps, especially during those tricky handoffs between different teams or outside vendors, a structured methodology maps compliance directly to every single phase of the agile lifecycle. It's not just something you cram in right before launch. It's brilliant, actually. In the discovery phase, you're already doing threat modeling. During architecture, you're running security design reviews. In development, your engineers are applying secure coding standards every day. Testing rigorously involves pen testing. Deployment means strict audit log verification, and maintenance requires continuous vulnerability management. When compliance is embedded at every single checkpoint like this, the handoffs become completely seamless, and literally nothing falls through the cracks.
And that brings us to step 5. Version control literally everything. Both HIPAA and the FDA are incredibly strict about having meticulous, immutable documentation for any changes to software that handles patient data. So your compliance docs, they need to live right there in version control alongside your code. They should never, ever be sitting in some dusty, forgotten shared drive folder that someone only remembers to update the night before an audit. Risk assessments, security decisions, test evidence, version control the whole shebang with the build. It creates this ultra-reliable, single source of truth that auditors just absolutely love.
Finally, Section 5, the true cost trade-offs.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the actual money. Let's be totally transparent here. Building for compliance from day one is going to cost you about 15 to 25% more initial development time. Doing things right takes a little more elbow grease up front. But look at the alternative. Trying to retrofit compliance after the fact typically costs 3 to 5 times more. And that huge multiplier comes from tearing down existing architecture, rewriting complex databases, and paying crazy legal and consulting fees to fix the mess. And that's before you even factor in a delayed launch, the utterly devastating liability of a patient data breach, or failed audits that block your market access entirely. This is fundamentally a risk management calculation, and the math is a no-brainer. Retrofitting is exponentially more expensive. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on as we wrap up today's explainer. If you're steering a healthcare product initiative right now and your development approach doesn't have crystal clear answers for handling PHI and regulatory mapping, what are those gaps going to cost you down the road? Remember, compliance and speed only clash when you treat compliance as a separate phase instead of a built-in discipline. Bake it into your process, empower your engineers with clear expectations, and you'll ship faster and safer than ever before. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.